Good morning.
Good morning.
What a buzzing room. This is the place to be on a Thursday morning. I'm used to saying Tuesday. We've changed it to Thursday. So on a Thursday morning. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Gina Cian. I manage the Alumni Sharing Knowledge program, the ASK program. How many of you, this is your first ASK breakfast that you've ever attended? So a lot of you. Please keep coming back. We have many opportunities for you to learn from speakers, from alumni especially who we bring back. But also, as you notice, you get to network with people before the presentation as well as after. So I invite you to keep joining and coming back. We have different topics. We have the schedule in the back for you. Our website also has our topics, ask.depaul.edu. So I invite you to visit and learn a little bit more about our services. We have alumni, like our speakers today, who offer career mentoring. You can do one-on-one conversation. You can ask them about what your concerns are, and they can share their advice with you. They also do practice interviews. So how many here are applying for positions actively right now? It's a good portion of you. And when you get called for the interview, which what they will talk about, the quality of your answer matters. The delivery of your answer matters. And this is where our mentors can really jump in and tell you, that answer not quite so good, maybe try it this way, do it this way, and that's the benefit of having a one-on-one practice. So I invite you to also do one-on-one practice interviews with our mentors. There's a lot of mentors in the room as well, so for the sake of our speakers and also for you, if you are an ASK mentor, please raise your hand. There is definitely a nice representation. How many are alum, but maybe not quite ASK yet? Great. We invite you to please join our efforts and become an ASK mentor. How many graduate students do we have? Okay. How many undergraduate students do we have? As always, it's a nice mix of alumni. We also have faculty and staff here. If you're faculty or staff, please raise your hand. Okay. Every audience member has a representation of the DePaul community. So welcome again. This particular breakfast in April is hosted by a wonderful partner, Heidi Nunez, I invited to come up here, who's our director of the Office of Adult, Veteran, and Commuter Student Affairs. And this is actually a sponsorship from one of their partners.
Absolutely. Thank you all for being here today. It's my pleasure to be here. Today's breakfast is hosted by our Office of Adult, Veteran, and Commuter Student Affairs, through a special initiative sponsored by Bank of America to help more student veterans transition successfully into careers and make sure that they are prepared to be financially fit in the future. So I just wanted to thank you all for being here. If there are any student veterans or alumni veterans among you, I'd love to meet with you and talk to you and tell you a little bit more about our program today and ongoing. We do have an office as well on this floor, on the 11th floor. If we miss each other today, please stop by the office of Veterans Affairs in room 11011. Thank you.
We have our last speaker who's joining us, but as she's jumping in, I'm actually going to go ahead and start introducing our panelists, and then Catherine actually has a few questions for you. So let me start off. You probably, as you were sitting here, maybe browsing through their bios up here, you probably read it. So I won't go through every detail. I do encourage you to read it through because they have wonderful experiences that is very hard to capture just in doing an introduction. However, Catherine Moser is a friend of DePaul, very, very much close friend of DePaul. For those who are graduate students especially, you might recognize her because she was at the CalSTAT Graduate School of Business Career Management Center. So she worked with employers, bringing employers here and preparing students for careers and job search. But she's now moved into the private sector, and she's with Aon Hewitt and is helping them with their recruitment strategy and diversity and inclusion and all of those strategies. So we're very pleased to have her back here. She's also an alum of DePaul. She obtained her M.Ed in College Student Development and Community Counseling. There's one piece. College Student Development. Counseling. And she's got her undergrad degree in business from Indiana University, Bloomington. And if you read her bio carefully, you may have read that she's an expert in popcorn. So if you have any questions, and I actually did ask her a question about popcorn. I'm like, maybe some kernels don't pop. You should ask her that question. She's apparently an expert at that because she worked in a popcorn company after undergrad and learned a lot more about that industry. And to her left is Anthony Williams. Anthony is another wonderful friend of DePaul. He's an alum. He obtained his political science degree here at DePaul University. Has done a lot of nonprofit consulting and also corporate consulting and international consulting, just helping businesses succeed. What are their goals and helping individuals succeed? What do you want to do? If you've been to some of the job fairs, we have an ask table there, and he is often there giving one-on-one advice on how to work the job fair, and he's always gotten phenomenal reviews. So I invite you to meet with Anthony as well. Currently, he's a recruiter at Accenture and does a lot more work in the digital space, the technology space. He'll share a little bit more about all of that and the tips and advice that he's gotten over the years. As our last speaker is kind of entering through, Catherine actually has some questions to kind of work us through it. Catherine will be moderating the panel. You want to ask the question?
Yeah. So I was hoping just in 10 words or less, if we could get some people to offer up, what are they hoping to gain from this session today, and what questions do they have? Yes, in the back.
Let's see, 10 words or less. I'm hoping to learn what I can do to get through these online things and actually get my resume into the hands of somebody who can do something with it. That's my question. You know, how do you get, what keywords, what do you have to do to get through the advanced online stuff so your recruiter actively looks at your resume?
We will definitely touch on that, yes.
More than 10.
I can't count. So. Yeah. Yes.
What shifts have you noticed in the HR world from yesteryear to today? So there's been a shift in HR as to how they look at a candidate and how candidates have to prepare differently than, let's say, even 5 years ago. What are those differences? And what are the new strategies for candidates?
Yes.
How to better, more successfully cold network recruiters.
Is it cold network?
Yeah.
How much should you know going into an interview about the interviewer and the company in general?
Question.
Could you define what is the transferable skills that maybe apply to different types of positions?
And one more, yes.
Yeah, any tips on getting past the phone screen or phone interview stage?
Yes. I have that on my list, yes. Okay. All right. Yeah.
So before we get started with the panel, these are wonderful questions, and there are a lot of burning questions in your mind that will pop up as well. Last, I'd like to introduce a wonderful professional and personal friend of mine as well. So Michelle Ivey, who, for some of you maybe who've been here, should also be familiar with her. She has done a lot of recruitment, both as a campus recruiter, previously from Deloitte, and now currently at EY. She's also done recruitment at the Chicago Public Schools. She was a staffing coordinator for Hyatt. For the Hyatt Hotels. And she also used to work here. She managed the on-campus interviews here at the Employer Relations Office, and so she's got a lot of industries she's touched, and I think she'll definitely can touch on the trends that Leslie was asking about. And she is an alum of DePaul, a double demon. She got her undergraduate degree in communication here and an M.Ed in accounts.
And educational leadership. I almost forgot.
Educational leadership. It's a
great program.
Yes. So please join me in welcoming them, and I'll kick it off to Catherine.
All right. Well, Gina and I put our heads together and thought about what are some key points that we would like to make today, with the goal of really talking about a couple pieces of the recruiting process, the resume and the interview. I will go ahead and start off with a few questions about resumes to kind of help people get an understanding of that. I'm going to caveat it with your job search starts before the interview. It starts before the resume. It starts before the job application. It starts with research, understanding your target, and networking. That's the beginning. So that's just my quick caveat to that. But to kick us off, can both of you talk about some of the top things that you look for on the resume?
I'll start. So just because of the nature of our jobs, we get tons of resumes. So usually it starts with a big pile on our desk, and we have to figure out who we select, who we don't.
We do look at every resume, but we only have a really small amount of time to view it. So what I look for is a resume that's clean, something that's easy for me to read. So while I look at each resume, if there is for example, my personal preference is I prefer not to see paragraph format on resumes. It's a lot to read. You can write a cover letter, but when I'm kind of doing quick hits, I'm looking for relevant experience and kind of how it flows. So something that's clean, that makes sense, that has bullets where important information is bold, something that's in order chronologically. So depending on where you are and where you're looking for, if you're a student, maybe your education would be at the top. If you're more experienced, your work experience at the top. Just something that helps me to understand who you are because you're not in front of me. So something that's really going to make it easy for me because time is limited, but also to highlight what it is that you're looking for.
Yeah, certainly. Great points. I would ditto that. In addition to saying there's nothing wrong with adding some of the basic qualifications from the job description, incorporating them into your resume. Because immediately I'm looking at the basic qualifications and your resume is right next to me. And I'm looking for the exact things that are in those basic qualifications to be in your resume. And if they're not, that's a turn down for me. As soon as I get your resume and I do that, and I confirm that you've done that, I immediately go to your LinkedIn. And if you don't have a LinkedIn, then I'm questioning why is it that you do not. Because I want to see, past work history, insight. I'm looking at your connections, visibility is important, your actions on your profile, groups that you're a part of, what interests you, because all those things play a big factor into you as a candidate.
Also, be specific about the job that you're applying for. Sometimes we're sourcing for more than one position. So a person won't say, I'm applying for this senior manager position or this internship position, and sometimes we find ourselves trying to guess what your graduation date is if you're a student or what position you're looking for, and that's not a good use of time, and sometimes it gets put to the side if I can't tell from the resume what you want. So put that on there as well.
And then lastly, curtail your resume to the positions that you're applying for. A lot of times we get tons of resumes that do not directly speak to the position, and you're doing yourself more hurt by doing that.
What would you say is one thing that almost always makes a resume pop to you, that you get excited about seeing?
I get excited about activities and extra involvement outside of work. So when people put something that they're passionate about, whether it's a volunteer experience, I just think it gives a little bit more color and things to talk about in the interview. We have our set questions that we ask, but we want to get to know you. So if you have something that's relevant, I like to see those things because I usually do ask about them, just to kind of learn about you and see how well-rounded the candidate is.
Yeah, and I would say your structure and your format is important. Your use of industry jargon relative to the position that you're applying for, that's also important. Not only am I looking for those buzzwords, but I also want to know how much about the industry do you know. So I'm going to be looking for those keywords that pop or lets me know that you're skilled or have some level of experience in whatever.
So what are your thoughts? Sometimes if people don't have relevant work experience, they might either choose to do a functional resume, or they might, or they have to really pump up their transferable skills. Can you comment on, chronological versus functional, as well as what you think would help individuals that you see, that you review, who don't have direct work experience?
Sure. Great question. I always encourage the functional approach if you don't have a lot of work experience. So groups that you're a part of, activities that you're a part of, courses that you've taken that's relevant to the position is also going to be important. Chronological, if you're seasoned in the industry, I want to know your work history, so that's important to me because that says stability, that says longevity. I'm also looking at your dates. If you're seasoned and if you're a little bit of both, then a combination resume is also good. part functional, and then part chronological. So it's really, I guess, based on industry experience and your preference, what you want to be careful.
And I agree. I would just add, for those that don't have a lot of relevant work experience, especially when talking to college students, I always ask them, well, what is relevant? I think it's more relevant for you to have worked a job through school, even if it's not related to the position you're applying for, because it shows a certain work ethic. It shows that you can manage multiple priorities. So just don't cut yourself short. Don't cut things out of your resume because you think it's not related to the position, because it's more impressive to show that you were able to work and go to school and do other things, even if it's not related to the position.
And I'll just add one thing. If you're considering a functional resume, what I would, any resume, I would strongly encourage you to discuss that with your career advisor here at DePaul, just because that often, as I've seen, brings about a really good conversation. All right. Can you talk about your top 3 pet peeves when you look at resumes?
I mentioned one, paragraph format. Hate it. For students who are graduating, who are still in school, who don't put their graduation date, their final graduation date, and when they'll be done and not going back to school. That's a huge pet peeve, because sometimes I'll pull a resume, the person's applied for, let's say, a full-time position, but they have another year of school. Then I call them, and then they tell me that, oh, I'm not graduating until this year. And I think it's an honest mistake, just because sometimes they don't know, but that's a pet peeve. I don't have a third yet.
Yeah. Adequate white space, as it was mentioned before. I tend to shy away from reading resumes that are just blotched with paragraphs. And, I tend to put those to the side, and I never read them. So that's 1. 2, misformatting of your resume. So you'll have 3 bullet points in one section, then you'll have 4 in another, and then maybe 2 down below. Squeeze out as much as you can, at least the consistent number of bullet points under each job description. And let's see, a third. Yeah, I would say misformatting. So for one job description, you'll actually spell out the month followed by the year. But for the next, you'll have just the months in numbers, so that consistency, shy away from that. I look at that as, lack of attention to detail, misspellings, of course, capital letters in the mix of words. A lot of times Microsoft Word doesn't catch everything. So you want to be careful to comb through your resume as well, because I'm looking at that as attention to detail, and preciseness and consistency as well.
My third pet peeve is 2-page resumes for candidates who do not have enough experience to justify the length. So I know the old rule was if you have 10 years or less, it should be 1 page. Sometimes it's harder when you get into the 6, 7, 8 year range, but if you're a student, if you have less than 5 years of experience, you should be able to fit it all on 1 page, especially for a traditional resume. If we're talking about a more technical resume, or if you're going into education, for example, sometimes those are a little bit longer, but for a traditional resume, keep it to 1 page. That's a lot of recruiters' pet peeve.
And can you share one memorable resume, whether good or bad, that just will always stick out in your mind when you think about resumes that you've seen? Positive or negative?
I've had a few positive, and it goes back to what I mentioned of just them being pretty, so that it's not a good word to use, but I looked at it, was like, oh, and it was just perfectly formatted, and everything that I needed to know was there. Cumulative GPA and overall major GPA, graduation date, because I recruit accountants, they had, when they would have their 150 hours or 225 here for DePaul students, they had special activities, they had special projects. It was just perfectly formatted. It was all 1 page. And it just had everything I needed to know. It didn't leave any questions. I see a lot of those. And I see a lot of the ones that you guys know me well by now that have paragraphs. So that I think those stand out to me more so just because it's a lot to read through. And I look at those and I think, well, I know I'm not necessarily I don't necessarily have the time to read this entire essay. And I think about it, and I almost want to call the candidate and tell them, like, fix this because no recruiter is reading this. So those are the two that came to mind.
I have one. I would say resumes that are not relevant to the position whatsoever. I understand that you're anxious and you really want to get a job, but if the job speaks nothing to the position that you're applying for, then why bother? And I get a lot of those, a lot of resumes that does not speak to the basic qualifications, that are not technical whatsoever, and I too want to call the candidate like, hey, you're not paying attention to what I need. So you want to be careful that you don't, in your anxiousness, sure, apply, but be careful to the position you say you're applying.
Can I ask a question? Yeah. Sure. I counsel a lot of law students and lawyers, and in our industry, the law firms and legal employers don't use objective statements, and like putting one on would be sort of a red flag in our industry. I understand that a lot of other industries don't, but I have a lot of attorneys and law students who are applying to the Ernst & Youngs and Deloittes and Hewitts of the world for the JD Advantage type positions, where it might not be a bar required, but you guys are looking for JDs. Is that something that you expect? Do you expect an objective statement? I know you said something about the putting the position on there, and I don't know how they would incorporate that exactly.
That's a great question. And so I recruit tax attorneys as well. So for those, they don't meet the objective simply because it's a niche area. So I know exactly where they're going. Now, it is nice for them to put on there whether they're, depending on the position that's posted. So I only recruit full-time, so we don't have many internship positions, but if they know that there's a full-time internship, then they should put that on there, just, looking to apply, and they can put it in the cover letter as well, looking to apply for an internship or full-time position. But for the attorneys, that's not needed because it's very specific. Good question.
Yeah, great question. I would say, the same for the realm that I recruit for. Give or take, I'll get them, but the one thing that I'm really paying attention to, again, is those basic qualifications, the skill sets. I'm going to comb through your resume, and I want things like SQL or JavaScript or HTML. Those are things that are popping to me. That's what I'm looking for. So I'm immediately combing through for those words. And then I'm paying attention to relevant years of experience for, relevant to the position. So, give or take, sometimes they're noticed, sometimes they're not.
And that question brings up a good point, too, for everyone, is the importance of knowing your industry. And so we're giving very general tips and thoughts about traditional resumes, but if you're looking to go into law, then you should understand what a typical attorney's resume looks like and find people who are doing what you do, who have resumes that they're willing to share, and kind of mimic that if you're not sure about the format. Because it will vary slightly by industry, and the expectations might be a little bit different.
All right, let's go ahead and move on to interviews. What would you say are your top 3 favorite interview questions?
So one that I always ask, and this is something that someone asked, actually I have 2 that someone asked me in an interview that I liked. I usually ask candidates, if you can take everything off your resume and only keep one thing on there, what would it be and why? And it's not really, I'm not looking for a specific answer. There is no right or wrong answer, and that's why I like the question. Just because we ask a lot about the position, your technical skills, and those are yes/no answers, and right or wrong. But it just helps me to get to know more about the person. Sometimes they'll bring up things and talk about their volunteer involvement, things that aren't even related to the job. Or maybe they'll talk about their GPA, and then there's a story behind that, as to, any challenges they may have had and why their GPA is so high and why that's such a great thing. And I think that it gives the candidate an opportunity to have a say in the direction of the interview. So I try to be fair in that way. My second favorite question that someone asked me in an interview, this was last year, was our company is made up of a lot of flavors, and I'm still in this one. And they said, because we talked about food, and if you were a spice or a food or an ingredient, what would you be? And why? And I was completely stumped. And I've interviewed a lot, and I've given a lot of interviews. And I came up with a good answer. I think it was a good answer. Off the cuff. And I said that I would be tempeh. So those of you who don't know what that is, it's like tofu. It's like a meat substitute. And my reason for that was because it is consistent in its texture, but it can pick up any flavor. You can season it to be chicken or beef, but it still holds its own texture. So I kind of related myself to that. So if anyone ever asks you that, you can use that answer.
Why do you think they asked that?
I think that in this case, I was speaking with the head of the department. I think that she asked me a lot of questions that like kind of caught me off guard. I think she was trying to see just how I dealt with kind of not off the wall questions, but ambiguity and what direction I was taking in. I think she was trying to get to know me a little bit better because we had talked about food. She asked me what I like to do in my spare time, and I mentioned I like to eat. And so then she went there and kind of took it a step further. So yeah, those are the two that are most memorable, just because they kind of go off the beaten path.
I can remember two. I was asked if I was a sport, which one I would be. Which one I would be. And of course, I'm a golfer, so that's what I said. I said, I would be golf. And they said, why? I said, because it's a self-competitive sport. Yes, you're playing with several people, or you could be playing by yourself, but you're only as good as you practice. So you can be mad at nobody but yourself if it's a bad day. The second question is, why shouldn't I hire you? That was a question that I was asked. I was stumped. I was really stumped. Why shouldn't you hire me? And I still to this day don't have a good answer for that. And then the third question would be, what are your weaknesses? And that's a question that we always stumble with. And there's no issue with giving a valid weakness, so long as you have an answer that circles back to show self-improvement, or how it is that you're working on your faults or your downs.
What do you think the interview gains from those questions that you mentioned?
Perspective, not just showing that, oh, I'm perfect, I'm great, I come with all the bells and the whistles. Of course, that's not true. How is it that in the midst of challenges or downfalls or hang-ups, how's it that you're working to improve yourself or become better at your mistakes?
Can you talk a little bit about interviews? We did have a question earlier about how do you get past the phone screen. Can you talk about what's the purpose of a phone interview? What do you look for? What are you looking to accomplish in that specific interview format?
For me, the phone screen is, where possible, I try to bring candidates in person, because I know that sometimes, people don't always translate the same via phone or in person, but because of the type of recruiting we do, and people may be in different cities or states, it's just doesn't make sense economically. So the phone screen is just a way to kind of weed people out. So I use it, one, if a person isn't in the same city and we need to review them quickly, or also if we're trying to make selections and we still kind of have too many people kind of on the list in the roster, I will do quick phone screens and call people just to talk through their experiences, because sometimes a person's resume could be great, but then the way that they communicate it kind of falls flat, and both are equally important. In terms of how to get past the phone screen, it sounds so easy, but so few people take advantage of the opportunity to treat it as if you were in person. So, and I've heard people give tips that, even this may sound extreme, but, putting on something that's professional. I can't see you, but, maybe you'll sit up a little bit straighter in your chair if you have on a suit jacket, even if it's just you by yourself. Being in a quiet room, being focused, not sitting on your sofa, not laying on the bed, because you can hear that in the person's voice, whether they're laying down or sitting up. So just those little things translate via phone. Also, practicing as well to speak as if you were in person. I think sometimes people get a little bit more casual via phone, so they may use more filler words, they may be a little bit more casual, use more jargon, but really just treating it like a for real in-person interview. And I can't tell you the number of people that get dinged because they don't take those little things seriously, or there's background noise, or they're coming from somewhere, and it's a time that we set aside, not me calling them off the cuff. So just kind of putting the time and attention into that.
Sure. I would certainly ditto that. I've had candidates where I schedule phone screens, and when I call them, they're nowhere to be found. But they call me back 5 minutes later, and of course, you only get one opportunity with a recruiter. Depends upon the recruiter, so you want to be conscious of that. Their time and your time. Another thing that, it's important, and I'm sure you've heard this before, the brand and the buy-in. How much about our company do you know? And I want to know that you know not just enough to be productive in the interview, but that you truly know about the company. That's important. And I would say the third thing is that, for me, be conversational. A lot of people allow their nervousness to overtake them during a phone screen, and they don't realize that the phone screen may be the only opportunity they get to talk with a recruiter. So really being conscious of those things.
That's a really good, and that plays well into one of the questions we heard. How much should you know about the interviewing the company? How much? How much in the interviews should people know? And what do you think are good things for them to do prior to interviews?
If they do know who the interviewer will be, or, a lot of times when I call to schedule screens, sometimes I'll do it off the cuff. It just depends on the time of day. I'll look at your resume to sort of give me insight as to whether or not you're working. So if I know you're working, I'll be conscious of the time I call. So that's important. So when we schedule a screen, and you know that I'm going to be calling you back, take some time to do some research about me and what I do and what my contribution to the company is. That wows a recruiter. To know that you've done enough research to know about them as an individual, and that you're able to entertain conversation about their tenure with the company. What is it that they like about working for the company that they're working for? So doing your research is very important. So I would say that's a big to do. And again, knowing the company outside of just enough for the interview. So, I want to know how much you know about my company and how it did last quarter. That may be a good piece of information. The latest innovative technology that we were part of. Tell me a little bit about our company's history and what you know, and how it came to be. Things like that. Fun stories are always important to show that you've actually given some thought about working with us, and there's an invested interest.
So what are just a quick few points that show you that somebody did a little research but clearly not enough?
That's a good one.
People, when they ask me things about the position or the group, so for example, if I'm interviewing for our tax group, and at the end of the interview, and I say, do you have any questions for me? And they may ask me, yeah, how many different service areas do you guys have in tax? Well, that's something that I know is on the website. It's front and center. And I don't think as a candidate it's a good use of time to spend that short amount of time asking those types of questions. So it shows me they didn't go to the website and read up on the service line that they're actually interviewing for, or do that basic research. So those are telltale signs.
And when they say, oh, no, I don't have any questions, I think you pretty much covered everything. That's
You want to tell them, make up something?
Yes.
Have either of you done video interviews before?
Yes. A lot.
A lot? Okay. Can you give a few quick tips about your experience with them?
Good and bad. Be conscious of how you're dressed. That's important. Even though it's a video interview, you still want to be productive and conscious of your appearance. That's important. Treat it as if it was a real, live, in-person interview. So careful of your surroundings, what's going on. It was mentioned before, background noise. Be conscious of that as well, and be prepared. Best prepared as you can. So, resume, notepad to take notes on what I'm saying. That's always intriguing. To know that there are things that you can reference back from our conversation at the end. So those are
I 100% agree, and my opinion on video interviews is that if I can't meet you in person, that's my second preference, because it's like being there, but I agree with everything you said about the location, and especially being here at DePaul, we're very fortunate because, there are, quiet spaces that you can use and, ways that you can reserve a room and set up your computer and Skype in there, so you don't have to be at home or be interrupted. So.
Yeah. And make sure you test the technology first,
Yes.
the day prior,
Yes.
like a full day prior, just so you can troubleshoot, and make sure that it's set up well before the start of your interview. That's some key things. So, we have some international students at DePaul, a good number of them, who are interested in working in the U.S. after graduation. What's your thought in when you're in the interview process? When should they bring up the sponsorship question?
So for me, and I've worked for quite a few companies that do sponsor, I always advise the candidate to just kind of allow the company to bring that up. I wouldn't lead with it because you're there, one, to tell them about you. So for example, if you're meeting them at a career fair for the first time, you don't want to lead with the fact that you need sponsorship. You want to talk to them like any other candidate. And a lot of times a company has pre-screening questions up front that they'll have you answer via an application. And then they'll be very upfront as to whether or not they provide sponsorship. So usually you know that even before you get to the interview. And a lot of companies, if they do select you for the interview process, are aware of what your status is. So I wouldn't lead with that. I don't recommend it at all because it 90% of the time comes up in the screening questions and application process.
Yeah, ditto. And I guess this is a level of comfort, but I would say be as upfront as possible as you can. But put it on your resume, what your sponsorship status is. And one pet peeve is that, it's for us, it's sometimes in the job description, depending upon, what the position is, whether or not candidates who require sponsorship need to apply. But I get a lot of those that need sponsorship, and for this particular skill set or position, we can't. And so I call them, and they either, it's not on their resume, or they mention it at that time. That shows me that they didn't pay enough attention to the advertisement to know that for this position you don't qualify. So level of comfort on your resume, if you're comfortable with doing that, I prefer you do that. Or I would say somewhere, maybe at the forefront or in the middle of your screening or your interview, mention that. And
I think we can incorporate. So then we're talking about resume, we're talking about interview. How do you get to the interview? Like, somebody asked, how do you get past online job boards? Which is a very loaded question. So direct ways to do that, as well as tactics to do prior to that, perhaps.
You need to be creative. I think in some cases it's very hard because the job boards are a sea of resumes, and in some cases, being transparent is dependent upon that recruiter, that company, as to how deep they go into those applications. You have to keep in mind that recruiters are fielding resumes for a position from several sources, from internal referrals, and then from the job board, and then from people who are finding your contact information and just emailing you. So you have it coming from all ways. So the chances that you will not get to review all resumes is likely, especially for the hot jobs. I do think that there are ways to try to find connections. So LinkedIn, as you mentioned at the very beginning, is a huge source and something that's very easy for everyone to use, because if you see a position at a company, go to your network and see who may know someone and ask for an introduction. I don't recommend just kind of willy-nilly reaching out to people and emailing them randomly. I think that it definitely works to your advantage to find someone who's willing to make the introduction. Sometimes you'll be successful, sometimes not. But you'll find more times than not, if you spend time developing your network and relationships, that people are happy to make introductions and kind of get you one step closer to finding someone, to maybe having a conversation or getting a foot in the door. So those are just some ways to kind of get around the process and navigate.
What should they be asking for when they ask for the introduction?
Good question. So I think that depending on, one is someone that you know that you're asking. Make sure that. I think that goes without saying. But, asking them, just asking them, hey, I see this job online and I noticed that you're connected to this person. I wanted to see, one, how well do you know that person, and ask them, would you feel comfortable making an introduction to them? And so asking in that way, it doesn't presume, right? You don't want to say, I'd like for you to make the introduction. Ask them, would you feel comfortable? And if not, would you mind spending a few minutes with me and letting me know maybe what you know about them and the company and the position? So sometimes you'll need to have a conversation to get to that connection. So it's an extra step. But I think that just asking and not assuming and putting it out there and see what they come back with is one way to approach it.
So then the goal would be to have a conversation with that person that you're looking to.
Absolutely, yes, definitely. And that goes back to as well developing your network. So hopefully this person would be someone that you communicate with fairly regularly or know fairly well. So perhaps they'll say, oh sure, I'll just connect you. But be prepared to have a conversation with that person and kind of go through the gatekeeper before you get to the wizard.
Great question. I would ditto that. Being conscious of your connections, and LinkedIn is a huge resource for me in how I acquire talent, because there's a lot of information that's transpired there, so that's important. I also like to think of it as a lot of times recruiters will set up accounts with different outlets to source for resumes, and depending upon their settings, some may require logging in to actually see who've applied to their position. So being conscious of that as well. So think about your social media networks. Is it that you log in every day? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But don't assume that recruiters will have the time to log into a particular network or association every day. My default is always, or my advice is always, to default back to the website. A lot of times when you apply to a particular position on a website, that email goes directly to the recruiter, calling their attention to the dashboard. They have a new candidate who's applied to their position. It's a little bit more work when you're using outside networks like CareerBuilder or Indeed, depending upon your alert settings, to make you aware of whether or not the candidate has applied. So I would always say default to the website, because that's always important. And with your social media pages, especially LinkedIn, because I love LinkedIn, as I said before, joining groups and being a part of discussions of companies that you desire to work for. A lot of times companies hire folks just to run their social media pages. And if you're an avid responder or contributor to posts and perspective, you're calling attention to yourself. And I would even encourage to, after maybe a month, month and a half, reaching out to whoever the webmaster is of that page, saying, hey, my name is such and such, I'm looking for positions in XYZ field. What does that say to them? Oh, yeah, I know this person, and they contribute to what I post, or I know their perspective. So again, you're building that brand, you're building that relationship. So it's awesome.
Let's take some time to open it up to what questions you have. So what was left unsaid, particularly with regard to resume and interviews, and kind of all the processes around that.
Yeah, so how important is the cover letter? And I guess that's it.
Okay.
I guess it just depends on the recruiter. Personally, I tend not to pay too much attention to the cover letters. They're good to have, but yeah, it just depends on the recruiter.
Yeah. It depends on the recruiter, and I would say the position as well. I don't necessarily pay attention to all of them, but for example, my attorneys, I do, because it gives an indication of their, it's kind of, I can use it sometimes as a writing sample. And I found that most of the JDLM candidates do submit cover letters. So it depends on the industry. But, a lot of times the recruiter, if they're pressed for time, will just go straight to the resume. I always say the cover letter does not hurt. It won't hurt you. It can only help you. Because, sometimes if I'm having a hard time or struggling, with which candidate to pick, I may go back and read the cover letter. Maybe they put something in there that sets them apart in doubt, I would say include it. It's a nice to have and a nice addition to the resume.
Yeah, in the way back. Yeah.
Me?
Sure.
All right. I guess, okay, this is for both of you, do you want to know the addresses of people's like Facebook and Twitter pages? And if so, what are the kinds of things you look for either that might enhance somebody's chances or might send up red flags?
I do not. I don't want to see people's Facebook pages. I probably feel the same about Twitter. I do like when they include links to their LinkedIn. Sometimes the Twitter is relevant depending on the industry or what they use it for. I've just found that most people use Facebook for social, purely social friend networking, and I stay off of Facebook from a recruiting perspective. I don't use it to vet candidates at all. So I do encourage people to make sure they keep their social media sites clean, and that everything that's on there is something that they would not mind a recruiter seeing. But I personally don't use Facebook for sourcing. I like to see links to LinkedIn and professional sites that are relevant to the job.
Yeah, ditto. Same for me. LinkedIn is really big. If you have a website or a web page linking you to your resume or samples of work that you've done in the technology space, that's very important. So that's something that I'm looking for. But yeah, I too do not utilize Facebook, or I don't utilize Twitter either. I will say in terms of LinkedIn, I'm looking at your connections, groups that you're connected with, your profile, how you're summarizing things, what's popping. So those are things that are important for me.
Yep.
How should a candidate that has military experience, how and when should they present that experience, and how do you evaluate it?
Sure. It's significant for me, certainly significant for me. There's actually a website that we're encouraged to go to recruit for military talent. So, yeah, certainly important.
And I think that should be on the resume. I think it's part of the profile, it's part of who they are. And I think that they should definitely incorporate that experience in the resume. It's very valuable.
Yeah.
You mentioned about you check the resume for the basic required first, but what if the positions have the two sections? Some of the skills are plus, and we fit for that skill, but we don't fit like 3 over 5 of the basic requirement.
Yeah, I would say the more the basic qualifications that you meet, the better. Basic qualifications is really what I'm looking for. Preferred is the nice to haves, but for the basic qualification, that's truly what I'm looking for.
And I'm just going to insert one quick thing. It's very, very, very difficult for candidates to really understand a job just from the job description, especially working for Aaron Hewitt, where I work with a client, so I work with a lot of different recruiters. It's anybody's guess, like which things are really sticking points for the hiring manager. So that's why networking conversations are really helpful. But that does become difficult to know like what's a sticking point, what's not. But trying to if you're really far away from a lot of things that say requirements, yeah, that's probably not. That would require probably more conversation around your network around what would be before that. Yes.
I wanted to add on to the military experience question. As far as when you're looking at the resumes, as a recruiter, do you often find it difficult to translate some of the skills into what's applicable to the position? Because we have just as much jargon as any other field, and you're like, well, how does this apply? Or would you rather leave it to the candidate to translate that themselves as resume?
Yeah. For me, I'm really looking at, again, the basic qualifications, and so long as those stick out, we're good. I agree, there's a lot of jargon that comes with, being in the military, but for us, there are specific trainings on what to look for, what stands out, translating military jargon to, what we need relative to the position.
I agree. I think it's a two-way street. So I think as much as you can help to translate some of that on your resume is helpful, but I agree companies nowadays are doing a really good job of training recruiters on what that jargon means, what that translates into. A lot of, or most big companies have veteran hiring initiatives, or they may even have, where I work, we have a veteran recruiter. So that person speaks that language and understands those resumes, so your resume isn't going to someone who's like, oh, what's this? And, it's kind of getting tossed to the side.
And I would also recommend you talk with your career counselor to help you. It's going to be a process, multiple iterations, to really kind of think through how to talk about your experience in a way that showcases what you did, your accomplishments, your skill sets, as well as highlighting ways that transfers to the role that you're looking for. Oh, sorry. I was like, all right. Yes.
Do your particular organizations use a lot of behavioral interviewing? Like, give me an example of a time when style questions. And if so, what are you looking for in a strong answer to that? Like, sort of what are you seeking in those types of questions?
Yes, I think I probably think the Lincoln answer is maybe yes, but and with that, we're looking for examples.
Could you kind of repeat the question and kind of explain what that means?
Sure, yeah. So the question was, does our company use behavioral interview questions? So behavioral interviews, the premise behind that is that past performance predicts future behavior. So a lot of the questions are situational, and they say, tell me about a time when you worked on a project and there were difficult people involved, or tell me about a time when you did not meet a deadline, and what happened, and what was that like, and what were the circumstances. So it's a very descriptive interview, and we're looking for very descriptive answers. So there are different kind of models. Some people use the STAR method or the SHARE method. I use SHARE, but essentially we're looking for the situation, the hindrance, the problem, the action you took to resolve it, the result, and then the E is for the evaluation. So sometimes people will give a complete answer and will say, well, this was the issue, this is what I did to resolve it, and this is what happened, but then they don't reflect, and they don't say, well, this is what I learned from it. So we're looking to see if you can walk yourself through your past experiences and communicate to us what makes you a strong candidate based on how you work through things. My company also does technical interviews in some cases, but that usually is a final round interview. So the behavioral is across the board up front, first rounds, and then in some of our groups, if you make it to final rounds, they want to know about your technical skills, so you'll get a case. And a lot of times, if the group does do a case, especially recruiting from campus, they'll do presentations and train people on how to be more successful in case interviews.
Well, sadly, our time has come to an end. An hour flies by very quickly. So I know there's a lot more questions here. There's time for open networking as well, but I know that some of them also have to head on to other appointments as well. So please join me in thanking Catherine and Anthony. I do want to remind you they're ASK mentors, and there are many ASK mentors in the room who can offer a lot of these support, and all of the things they're talking about that are more in a high level, you can do more customized and one-on-one with a mentor. So I do want to point out a few resources real quick. ask.depaul.edu has our website, and we have pre-arranged practice interview slots already that you can look at. And so you can look at the dates, the times, the locations. Some are by phone, some are by video. And so this is a great opportunity for you to just start looking at different ways to practice one-on-one and the things that they're talking about. I didn't know about the shares. That's interesting. So the behavioral interview answers that you have. So these are great questions to be asking.
What was that website, please?
ask.depaul.edu.
Thank you.
And so you can sign up for practice interviews one-on-one. And there's also, if you are a student, DePaul.interviewstream.com, which we pay for you, and you can practice those video things that Anthony was talking about. You can record your answer. If anything, at least it will just give you some questions by industry. What are some sample education questions? What are some sample technology questions? And you can practice your answers on your own as well. So we have all these resources. Come talk to us. Come talk to your career center if you have additional questions about it. But again, thank you to Catherine and Anthony. and Michelle as well for these.